Richie Ramone loves noise. He loves loud music with punk sensibilities, off-kilter records from far-flung corners of the world. The sort of songs that grab you by the ears and make you say, what on earth is that? Richie's love affair with the thrill and anarchy of this sort of sound began in Thomastown, Melbourne, in the 1970s. And it's run as a thread right through his life, from his first gig at the iconic festival hall to his family's experience of the Westgate Bridge collapse, from a short-lived career as a prison officer to finally opening his own record store on Brunswick Street in Melbourne. Hi, Richie.
Oh, g'day, Sarah. How are you?
What was the first punk record you ever heard, Richie? What do you remember?
I believe it was the Sex Pistols.
Start at the top.
And that's thanks to my brother and his love of the Clash and the Sex Pistols and Blondie. So that it just was this visceral experience of the difference from what I was used to my parents listening to, with Dad listening to the Chain Gang.
What's the Chain Gang?
It was basically all these Builders Labourer Federation type characters spruiking about the construction industry on radio in the morning, early in the morning.
So it's not a band, the Chain Gang. It's not a musical genre. It's builders talking about the construction industry.
Exactly. And my dad being a scaffolder rigger, that was that was what he listened to when he wasn't listening to the races. Oh, yeah, that came later in the day. And with Mum, it was Neil Diamond and Boney M, and so it just was this explosion of, what is this?
And how old would you have been, Richie, when you first heard the Sex Pistols?
8. And I had no inkling of the everything else surrounding the Sex Pistols. At the time, I had no idea about all the whole God Save the Queen furore and things like that. It was just this blast of, it just appealed so much. I actually, many years later, so it was probably in about 2004 or 2005, I was on this website and people were asking people to publish their top 100 albums. And I remember, I love a list, and I remember contributing, and the crap that I copped from friends when I had the Sex Pistols in the top 10, they're like, really? You rate this? I'm like, it had such an impact on me as a kid. It has to be in my top 100. Maybe it was in the top 20. I might have had it in like 11 or 12 or something. But the crap I copped from friends, they're just like, they just would not even look at the rest of the list, the other 99.
So you had this moment of hearing this LP at home and just your brain exploding. When did you first get to a gig which really grabbed you by the collar? How old were you for that?
I was 11, almost 12. I was a few months shy of 12. It was February 1981 at Festival Hall to see Devo. Pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. How did you get there as an 11-year-old?
With my brother and his mates. I mean, what legends were they to take the 11-year-old along? One of them drove. It wasn't my brother. It would have been one of the other guys, like Wayne Putland or Duncan Morrison, or it would have been one of those guys. It was a carload of 17 and 18-year-olds and me, the 11-year-old.
Devo always have such a great orchestrated look. What were they wearing that night? Do you remember?
Oh, of course, they were wearing their power domes, they were wearing their jumpsuit outfits. And just the entire show was preceded by this video, this like movie-esque type lead-in with video clips, and it was so theatrical as well. I remember them. It's weird that I remember this, I know, but, I remember them mimicking sex acts with dummies and things like that. It was so theatrical.
And what about the whole atmosphere of being there with your brother and his mates? Was that part of it, feeling like you're in this tribe of older kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I remember my brother and his mates all smoking cigarettes and being told off and told to put them out because you weren't supposed to smoke. I think you could smoke probably on the stands, in the seated stands, but not on the general admission floor. But yeah, definitely, you're right in that feeling like this tribe that you've been accepted into. And then afterwards, I remember drinking long necks of beer at the car before we headed off back to Thomastown.
How was school the next day for you then?
Mum let me pull a sickie. Mum did not make me go to school the next day. She was an absolute legend.
No wonder this stands out as one of the highlights of your youth.
It's still top 3 gigs of all time.
Top 3, really? Well, tell me about another one.
A band called Big Black. May 20th or about then. It was the day I got my driver's licence in 1987 at the Prince of Wales in St Kilda. And it was just this wall of solid noise. It was like you could feel it. It was like you could touch the sound that was these 3 guys were blasting. Just, they had these guitars that were strapped around their waists rather than on straps slung over their shoulders. And they used these unusual metal picks to pluck the strings that created the strangest sound. And I was a fan of Big Black from about the age of 14 when an absolute legend, Steve Pig Morgan from Missing Link Records, put me onto Big Black. And he was fully responsible for that. So he was the one that told me Big Black were coming to Australia, and I've got to see them. And it was just incredible.
You say it was the day that you got your driver's licence. So did you drive yourself to that gig?
I did. I took my friend Michelle and I managed to crash my car leaving the car park.
No.
My brain was just not functioning. I was floored by that show. It was so impressive. I'd parked beside a pillar and I just put my wheel on full lock and reversed and bang into the pillar and put this big V in the panel of the front driver's side panel.
As a young punk, Richie, did you stand out in Thomastown?
I didn't have a mohawk. I never was that kind of punk with the mohawk. I was also going bald by the time I was 17 or 18, so the mohawk was out of the question. So I don't think I would have stood out because,
Well, what kind of area was it back then when you were growing up? What do you remember?
As Thomastown, we used to describe it like you're in Thomastown when you've just gone over the hill from Keon Park along Mahoney's Road, and you see the giant fluffy dice as the landmark. That's when you know that you're in Thomastown. Or the moment you see teenagers wearing moccasins around on the streets, that was basically Thomastown. It was home of the Tomo Sharps.
What's a Tomo Sharp?
So the Sharpie gangs that they were just local thugs. I got beaten up by one of them one day.
What did they look like, Richie?
Sort of really short hair on top and mulleted at the back. The ciggies under the t-shirt or the blue singlet, jeans and runners and barely any teeth in their mouth.
What shadow, you'll get beaten up again if you say things like that. Were you a kid who liked to get into fights, or was that sort of stuff something you tried to avoid?
No, I didn't like to get into fights. I'm very much a pacifist, and occasionally they found me, but I never went looking for them.
You had an older brother, this older brother who first introduced you to the Sex Pistols. What was his room like at home? How did it look?
The most memorable thing about his room was this pull-down blind in which he'd very meticulously, he'd found some silver duct tape, and with a scalpel, I don't know where he got the scalpel from, he very meticulously outlined and carved out all these logos of bands so he stuck the duct tape on the blind and then being careful to not go through the blind, carved out Blondie and The Clash and the Sex Pistols and AC/DC, and I'm trying to think of some of the other ones.
That is amazing commitment to home merch.
Absolutely. Yeah, because these days somebody would just get on an internet website and and upload a logo and they'd have it 2 days later. And it was pretty impressive to put that effort in.
Did you have much patience or interest in sort of, music that was on the charts in the late 70s? Like, I don't know, who would that have been? Like
Men at Work like Cold Chisel or
who were the guys in Tartan?
The Bay City Rollers?
Was that all happening? What did you think about pop?
I despised it. I just had this hatred of it. I still have a dislike of commercial music and the mainstream. I just can't. I can't stand it. I really struggle at weddings. I really, really struggle at weddings. If I hear You're the Voice again at a wedding,
you won't be held responsible for your own actions.
For my actions, no.
What did you do after leaving school?
I got an apprenticeship as an electrician. There was an old family friend that lived in the same court that we lived in, and he always said he had this job. Like, he told me, like, at age 8 or 9, he told my mum and me, and just if you ever want to be an electrician, just... And that's how easy it was. And I was like, okay, yeah, I've got a job.
So what, how old were you, 15 or 16? So I got out of school as soon as I could,
15. Yeah, 15.
And what kind of apprentice were you?
I was really bad. I wasn't helped by. I was stationed at the Ford Motor Factory, and I would spend my days. I kid you not. I would spend my days painting steel conduit. All the electrical work at the Ford Motor Factory had to be housed in steel conduit, not the plastic stuff or the PVC stuff that you see regularly. This is steel because of the nature of the factory. And it all had to be painted. It had to be orange. So the steel conduit doesn't turn up orange. It has to be painted orange. That was my job. I did that for like a year and a half. I was so bad. But when it came to the schooling, so you had to go to trade school one day a week. I was very, very good at the written side of it. Like, I got top marks always for all that, because maths was always my best subject at school, and there was lots of maximum demand and things like that. But I hated being an electrician. And I didn't like the early mornings either, because I was still going to all these shows. I was going to all these gigs many nights a week.
So you weren't a fan of the work or of the early mornings. How did a trip to the UK rescue you from your life as an apprentice?
Oh, well, I finished the 4-year apprenticeship, and then a few months later, my next door neighbours, the Morrisons, which I'd known all my life, they were also English immigrants, and we'd grown up together. So they were like, Richie, we're going to the UK. Why don't you come with us? And I thought about it, and then eventually I checked my bank balance, and because I never ever went to the bank, so I got paid in cash by the electrical company, and I checked my bank balance, and I had $12,000 in the bank.
What? How did that happen?
At age 19 in 1989, and I vividly remember thinking, I could buy a house next year if I keep working as an electrician, and this money just keeps getting put in there, and I'm still buying records, and I'm still enjoying myself, and my bank balance just keeps going up. Because it was I remember there was $180 a week was going into the bank account.
Well, just automatically? You weren't responsible for it?
Automatically, yeah. I got the rest in cash. And I never, ever, ever went to the bank. And that's why when they asked if I want to come with them on this holiday, I had no idea what I had in the bank account. And so I checked it, and I made this decision. And I was like, oh, hang on, the Ashes are on as well. I'm like, yep, I'm going. I love my cricket. But
so this was your sliding doors moment where either you could be landed gentry now. I could be speaking to Richie Ramone, owner of multiple properties and investment units and oceanside villas, or the guy who went to the Ashes in 1989.
It was a very memorable experience, the Ashes in 1989. Nobody gave the Australians any hope. It was an experience even just getting tickets. Imagine pre-internet, like trying to get tickets from Melbourne to Lords and Leeds and Old Trafford and like, oh my God, imagine that.
But you managed it.
And it was really, well, it was such a spur of the moment decision that I had to actually organise for the tickets to not be sent to Australia. The tickets had to be held at the first test. At the grounds at the first test, which was in Leeds. I forget what they call the Leeds Oval, but anyway. I got there the day of the first test, the first day of the first test starting. It was a mad rush to, like, the game's already on and I'm at the ground wanting to get in to get a beer and sit down and watch the cricket. I missed about the first session. I remember I remember I was in my seat by about 1 p.m.
And what happened for you for work when you made it back to Australia after the Great Ashes adventure?
I had the strangest experience at the Manchester ground, which I think was the fourth test at Old Trafford. In the merch stand, looking at all the different merch you can buy, and I bump into one of the Sparkies that I've worked with on the job sites, and Dave's like, "G'day." Back then I was Richard. "G'day, Richard," and like, "Dave, how's it going?" And he's there just for one day of the cricket, and he's like, What are you going to do when you get back? And I was like, "I don't know, I haven't worked that out." And he says, "Well, if you want your job back, give me a call because I'm a supervisor now. I can make that happen." So I did. I called Dave when I got back, and I got my job back with the company that I did my apprenticeship with.
Were you any better as an electrician this time round?
No, I was so bad. I can only imagine that Dave really liked me as a person, because he can't have been judging me on my electrical work because it was terrible. I mean, it was nothing that was going to burn places down or anything. I just had to ask a lot of questions about how do you do this and how do you do that, because I'd spent my whole time painting. I just had no idea.
How did things change for you work-wise when you were 21?
So as I approached my 21st birthday and was having a rather large gathering, a massive, massive party, the company, the electrical company, was downsizing, and so because I'd just been re-employed by them, it was easy for them to dispose of me. As I said, it was probably a relief for them to get rid of the worst electrician on their books. So I was at a bit of a loss as to what to do, and Minotaur Books in the city had long been a place that I'd frequented since 1977. I'd been going to this establishment. So for 13 years I'd been going to Minotaur Books, and they knew me, and it was actually some time earlier, whilst I was still an electrician, they had asked if I would consider working for them. So they were my backup plan. As far as once I lost my job as a Sparky, I wandered into Minotaur and was like, "Gee, is there any jobs going?" And they employed me.
And what kind of place was Minotaur Books? What did they sell?
It's a popular culture store. All the comics, so it was where I'd been going to get my comics from 1977 and Doctor Who and Star Trek, and books and movie memorabilia and toys and all that sort of stuff.
So that was probably a better fit than being an electrician. What about the music business, Richie? How did you first get into that?
Well, when I got the ask from Minotaur, very unceremoniously, I might add too. From there, I was actually doing the mail order role at Minotaur, so dealing with mostly, at that point it was mostly within Australia. People, generally it wasn't overseas orders, but I was shipping out a lot of orders around Australia. Again, pre-internet, all via catalogues and people standing orders for particular comics, just charging to their credit card and stuff. So when I got removed from Minotaur, I went to my favourite record store, Go Records.
So what kind of place was that? That's your first record store to work in. What was the best bit about working there?
Oh, God, if he hears this, he's just going to get a big head. But Bruce, like working for Bruce, I'd got to know Bruce over the years. I'd been going to Go, so I started going to Go in about 1983, 1984. And Bruce was one of the owners, and Bruce goes back to the days of the 70s and the early days of Australian punk rock and the Saints and the Radio Birdman and Psychosurgeons, and I could reel off a whole bunch of bands you might never have heard of. But yeah, he was there at the beginning of the Australian punk rock explosion, and so then he created Go Records, and as importing all these weird and great punk rock records from overseas and selling and distributing them across Australia.
And what kind of boss was Bruce?
Loose. And he was terrible. He was nasty, and he was just, I can say this, 'cause Bruce and I are still great friends and we speak most days, but he would leave rude, nasty notes on my desk. I got the job as the mail order person. When I applied, there was 74 other applicants, and they said I was the only applicant that had any mail order experience. Plus, they knew what they were getting. So I had my own little desk in this sectioned off area upstairs, and so many times I came to work and there was a note. And his handwriting is actually like a doctor's, so you can imagine trying to decipher what it actually says. But on the back of, whatever paper was lying around, he would just close your effing window or I'll call you at home and abuse you! Exclamation. Imagine if an employer did that today.
That is not HR protocol. That's a go-go protocol. Well, Richie,
there was.
Out of this, you eventually took a job driving around musical superstars who were really very unpunk, but were they fun?
Fun. Spandau Ballet were fun. They were a lot of fun. Some of them embrace you, and some of them, the directive is you're not to speak to the artists unless you're spoken to, unless they actively, engage with you. I was very good at that.
You'd sit quietly?
And you weren't to chew gum either. You don't chew gum. I remember you're not supposed to chew chewing gum. It was great in that they didn't expect you to open doors for them or things like that. But
you had to be quiet and not chew gum.
Quiet and not chew gum. And probably not fart either, but they never actually told you that.
I think that's just a given in human company, personally. But I've never driven superstars around. So who were the ones that you enjoyed driving?
Beyonce was lovely. She was really, really sweet.
I hope you didn't fart around Beyonce, Richie.
I did not. There might have been a little bit of drool that
You're only human.
Escaped, especially when, and I hope I can say this. It's just what happened in the back of the van. She was talking to her costume designer that was sharing the ride with us, and he was really gleefully expressing this leg rub that he'd given a person from the crew, and Beyonce just saying, "Oh, could I have one too?" And now you're getting paid to. I think I had to adjust my rear vision mirror so that I couldn't see. I don't want to have an accident with Beyonce in the car.
You picked up Rihanna on a big day in history. When was that?
And it was a very, very special, momentous day in history because it was here in Australia. It was it was kind of early afternoon that the announcement came through that Barack Obama had won the presidential election for the first time, the first win. So I was picking up Rihanna and her crew from the Grand Hyatt in Collins Street, and and they're all she and her whole crew are African American descent, and I will never ever forget them coming down this sort of marbled walkway. It's like an arcade sort of type entrance there's two entrances at either side of the on either street, but this alleyway, marbled laneway type exit or entrance from the hotel, and the announcement had just come through. It like literally in the last 30 minutes, and they came down that walkway just hooting and hollering and dancing, and they were like, "Whoa!" And they got in the car on cloud nine, and I was so fortunate to be there at that moment. I'm sitting here with the hairs are standing up on my arms just thinking about that moment.
Mm. I hope you drove them there safely and with great focus then.
As they got in the car, the large security guy, Pat, jumped in the front seat. He's like, "Hey, Richie, it's a wonderful day." I'm like, "Pat, it is a momentous day. It is so incredible. I'm so happy for all of you guys. It's just, this is incredible. What an incredible result. Congratulations." And we took off it was a very short drive to go to the tennis centre, and I missed the turn into the tennis centre. I missed the turn. And it's one of the things you just don't do. Like the drivers, when, as one of the newer drivers, you get told by the older guys that have been doing it for years, whatever you do, don't have to do a U-turn. The moment you have to do a U-turn, the artist knows you've missed your turn. You've missed your turn off. And Pat in the front, he's like, "Hey, Richie, you missed your turn." I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "It's all right, brother. It's all good. We don't care."
It was part of the payoff of Obama's election, was them not leaping down your throat for that.
Exactly. No, they did not care, Rihanna, didn't care. Nothing could surly this great moment.
On air, online, and on the ABC Listen app. This is Conversations with Sarah Kanowski. You can subscribe to the Conversations podcast. To find out more, just head to abc.net.au/conversations.
So, Richie, you grew up in Thomastown in Melbourne, but your parents are originally from Glasgow. What brought them to Australia?
Oh, they won what was called the pools in 1966. They won the pools, which, I think they won not the equivalent of like winning $1 million, but they won a substantial amount of money. Yeah.
They decided with that to come out to emigrate.
Yeah, to emigrate to Australia. I wasn't born at that point, so they picked up Jack and came here on the boat. It took a long, long time. I believe my mum was seasick the whole time. I seem to recall that from the younger days. I seem to remember that getting mentioned. And Thomastown was where we landed. There was already a lot of my dad's side of the family had moved out here as well, and most of my mum's side of the family stayed in Scotland, in Glasgow, but Dad's Glaswegian family, most of his siblings had moved out to Thomastown and Layla and Epping as well. We basically were all over the same side of the north of Melbourne.
You were only in your 20s when both your mum and dad passed away. When you lose your parents at that point, does it feel like there's some kind of unfinished business there in terms of your relationship with them?
Yeah, it's so often that I think, if only I could ask Mum or Dad to confirm this or confirm that, or ask more about Glasgow and their upbringing in Glasgow, and it's extremely tough to. I think I was nearly 24 when Mum passed, and I was 26 when Dad passed.
Tell me a bit about your dad, Richie. What had happened to him at work one day?
Well, so as I mentioned earlier, Dad was a scaffolder rigger and working on the various sites around Melbourne. But one of the big jobs that he found himself on was the construction of the Westgate Bridge. And he was at work that day, October 15, 1970, when the bridge collapsed. A day in which 35 men died on that building site when a span collapsed. And it was basically, for my father, he knew about 28 of those 35 guys. It was like losing 28 mates at once. The impact on our family can't be overstated as far as that bridge collapsing, and the impact and the future repercussions on our family were immense.
What do you mean, Richie? What kind of impact did it have?
Well, so I vividly remember Mum always saying through my through the later years after the bridge, that your father only ever drank socially, but it turned my father into an alcoholic. It was the pub every day. One or two of the other survivors that lived over our way as well. They all died very, very young. I remember growing up, just the number of times my father telling me of this bloke who've had a heart attack, or they've died suddenly, and then my father as well in his mid-50s. They all died very, very young, and as I said, and they all, those that didn't die really, really young, and even those that were, they were all alcoholics. It turned them all into alcoholics. Somewhere in my belongings, I have a telegram that was sent to my father the evening of the accident, requiring him at work the next day. There was no trauma counselling. There was no nothing. It was, you are back at work the next day.
I guess as a young kid, as a teenager, you probably wouldn't have appreciated that. As an adult, you can see your dad with the eyes of compassion.
Yes,
but I guess
can.
As the son, that wouldn't have been easy to see.
Yeah, it's only later in life that I have a better appreciation of that I needed to show more compassion and be more understanding of what my dad had experienced. And sadly, I didn't have that as a young kid and a teenager. I just didn't have that knowledge, and so it's one of my great regrets that I needed to, because my father and I struggled to stay in the same room as each other often. Unless the cricket was on, we could actually sit and watch a whole day's cricket together and barely say a word to each other. But yeah, I just wish I had had a better understanding of the impact of that bridge on his mental health.
It was 11, I think you said, that you went off to your first gig. How young do you remember being given free range around the city? What kind of age were you heading off on solo adventures?
I was 8. It was 1977, and I discovered a love of comics. And then I've mentioned Minotaur Books, and they had this tiny, tiny brick and mortar store in Tattersalls Lane it's just the tiniest storefront. And I would depart from Thomastown and walk the 20-minute walk to the train station and jump on a train and head the 40-minute journey into the city. And then I would just have adventures in the city. Mum would give me $20.
That's a lot back then.
It's a lot of money, right? 1977, $20.
You're a lord.
I played pinballs when I wasn't at there was the amusement parlours.
Nothing bad ever happened to you on those forays into the big smoke?
I wouldn't say bad. I definitely saw some things, and I met strange individuals. I met homeless people. I met artist types and buskers, and I just talked to people, and I just met so many strange individuals and unusual people. And
so was your mum sort of waiting by the door, anxious about her little 8-year-old coming back home safely?
Sometimes I would call from Thomastown Station, and she would come and collect me, or often I just walked again the 20-minute walk home. And there was I never even had to ring, like, from the city. I never actually had to ring and say, yeah, it's 2:00, I'm fine. It was just, I'd leave home at 10 a.m. and I'd come home at about 7 or 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night.
Well, this kind of independence seemed to go into the stratosphere when you were 13, when you went back to Scotland on your own. How did that happen?
Yes. I mean, the family, Mum and Dad wanted me to go and see the family, and I hated school. I really, really hated school, and the thought, and I think my brother was critical to maybe my brother really disliked me, and maybe my parents disliked me, and they just were like, let's just send him to Scotland on his own at 13.
What do you remember about the flight, Richie?
All sorts of things happened on that flight. I couldn't eat. I wouldn't eat the food. I've always said I'm a really fussy eater, but I'm really easy to please. Like, I'll have cheese on toast for dinner. I'm happy with that. I'm really happy with that. I'm happy with beans on toast for dinner. I'm really easy to please, but I am fussy. But yeah, I just couldn't eat the food. And I remember I'd met this elderly couple. The man was in a wheelchair, and they would just pass on their fruit to me. I was happy to eat all the fruit that came with with each. You always got like a little apple or something, or an orange in your food platter, but I wouldn't eat any of the rest. And so they would just pass on their fruit to me. And at the time, my brother was My brother would have just started as an air traffic controller, and I believe he spoke to the pilot. And I actually got a tap on the shoulder from one of the crew saying, would you like to see the cockpit? And I was like, yeah. 13, I get to go, and as long as it's not a flying high moment and I have to sit on the captain's lap or anything. So, yeah, I got taken up to the cockpit and shown various devices and things, and it was fantastic because that just does not happen these days.
You survived the flight and you got to Glasgow, and then did you have to go to school?
I did. I didn't initially. So my mum was going to be turning up some months after me, like 2 months after me. And so initially I was just lazing about, enjoying myself, just exploring Glasgow. So initially I was not going to school, and then eventually one of the relatives was like, Richie, you've got to start going to school. I think I'd been there for about 6 weeks at this point. They're like, you need to go to school. Your mum's going to kill us if you're not at school when she arrives. So I started going to school I was staying at my cousin Carol and her husband Steph's. I was staying at their place, and the kids downstairs were actually going to this school called Allen Glens. And when the other relatives were like, found out, no, he's not going to Allen Glens. I'm like, what? That's the worst school in Glasgow. I'm like, really? They're like, oh, there's no worse. Awesome. So they sent me to the worst school in Glasgow.
And what was that like? What did you see in the playground of Allen Glen?
It was unruly. There was fights everywhere. There was a kid that used to get around with glue up his sleeve. He was high on glue all day. It was just, I was this freak from Australia. They've never met an Australian. They haven't heard an Australian accent. And so I just had this troop of people, of kids following me everywhere I went. It's like there was always 20 and 25 and 30 kids just like alongside me and following me. I made the mistake one day of walking down this walkway where these kids were up on it was a walkway in which it got lower and lower and lower, and so the walls either side of it had these steel railings, and I didn't realise that if there was kids up there on the ledge but alongside the steel railing, don't walk under them because they will attack you. And I did. And they attacked me, and they got attacked by all the kids that were behind me.
Like a brawl.
I didn't have to do anything.
Brawl over Richie.
It was nuts. It was the worst schooling. It doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for a long, long time. It got ripped down.
So did that experience in Glasgow's roughest school serve you well, do you think, later in life when you found yourself working as a prison officer?
I think it might have. I hadn't actually put that two and two together, but thank you. That's probably...
Tell me about that role and what kind of fit it was for you. As a guy who sounds like from a fairly early age was pretty anti-authoritarian, how did you go being the enactor or the holder of authority in a prison?
That sat uncomfortably with me, and I was different to the other officers. I was clearly different to them. I was somebody that could actually have a conversation with the prisoners, and I genuinely was interested in their well-being and, you know, how they ended up where they've ended up. And I certainly wasn't ever power tripping, or I wasn't interested in breaking their balls. And I remember one of my very early days, I got along really well with Bill. He was a smart character. He was it was some sort of like, money laundering, fraudulent, transaction type thing. He was clearly smart. And I remember he'd seen my tattooed arm, and he just started singing a Pink Floyd song from Pink Floyd's debut album, which is an amazing album. And he just started singing the lyrics to it. And I just looked at him and I was like, okay, yeah, you're all right. and him and I got along as well as a prisoner and an officer are allowed to get along.
What did you used to do when the mail came in, Richie?
So I very quickly cottoned onto the lunch relief role at the prison, and that was a role that certainly suited my night my night owl hours in that, like, I started at 10 a.m., 10:30 or 11 a.m. And I would like to just have a little bit of fun with the mail, with the prisoners. And so you basically you've got it all sorted for that unit, and you're just calling out surnames. You just have to have a loud, you have to be able to enunciate to the back row. So that's why I'm not shy about I get on public transport or something and people need to move down the front. I'm that person. I'd get rid of the ones that were just letters and stuff for people, for the prisoners. But you'd also be bringing up the sheriff's fines for the prisoners, and I'd love nothing more than I'd leave all the sheriff's fines for the end, and I'd call out those guys' names, and I'd wait until they're all gathered in a group, and as I handed out their sheriff's fines, I'd be like, "So, Jones, got your sheriff's fines here. It's a few pages. How much do you reckon you owe?" "Oh, I don't know, boss. I got no idea." I'm like, "Come on, have a guess." I don't know, $3,500. I'll be like, "Oh no, you've been much better than that. It's $6,000. And then they'd walk off and have a look at all these various fines that are on these pages, because it's all outlined. It's all like, not affixing a trailer properly, or not having paid your public transport fines, or your speeding fines, or your red light camera fines. But I'd love, I'd love when I get to the last one and, "Smith, yeah, here's your fines." "Oh, okay. How much do you reckon you got?" "I don't know, $15,000. "Well, no, you're today's winner, $22,000. And he'd just go bouncing off down the stairs, go, "Woohoo, I win today."
It's like perverse bingo.
But it was just some fun, some lightheartedness in the prison. There's not a lot of joy in their days. It was just a little bit of lightheartedness, and it eased the boredom for me.
What was the close call you had with a serial killer?
Oh, yes, in one of the protection units. I won't mention the name, but he'll never be he's one of the never to be released individuals. He had a job as a billet so a working prisoner is referred to as a billet, and so he had a job as a billet in the unit he was in, and one of the billet's jobs is to clean the officer's toilet daily. And the officer's toilet door is locked from the outside. It's not locked from the inside. So you don't need your keys to get out. But I used to be the person that would let him into the toilet most days. I'd unlock the toilet for him to give it a clean. It came about after I'd left that they discovered he actually had a computer in his cell, and they actually discovered that he was hatching a plan to, once the toilet door was unlocked, he was hatching a plan to have it so that the door was locked from the inside, and have pushed an officer in there with him and was going to kill the officer. So that's about as close as I reckon I've come to being killed by a serial killer. It could have been me. I like to think that he's a coward by the nature of his crimes and the people he killed. He's been portrayed in television shows and stuff like that, which I've watched, and in the television shows I've seen him portrayed in, I've looked. He's like this hard guy, this hard man. I'm like, no, he's not. He's a coward. And so yeah, but he probably would have maybe tried it on one of the more slighter officers.
How long did you last in this job, Richie?
After 2 years, I hated it and I wanted out. But I was in this period. I found that my friends around me were my brother, and they're on their third bouts of long service leave, and I'm like, I've never ever had long service leave. So I hung in it for 7 years. I found out you get long service leave on a pro rata basis at 7 years, and so I hung in there to that point. I got the long service. I had the long service leave approved. In the meantime, I'd actually opened up my own record store, and I was going in. So I was working 2 day jobs, working the record store, and so the hours at all. I was pulling lots of sickies at the prison in order to open up my record store, having not told a single person at the prison that this is what I'm doing. I just entirely kept that to myself, and I applied for the long service leave, got the long service leave signed off by the general manager, and I never went back.
Had that always been a dream, Richie, ever since you were, a kid into records, that one day you'd be master of your own record store domain?
I wouldn't say it's always been a dream. I mean, I did that. I worked in a record store when I was younger, and I loved it, and I got that. I got that out of my system at that point, because it is a passion for many, and it really is for many, many people. They have this dream of working in a record store, and I guess I did that. It didn't come until how much I was hating being a prison officer, and that I realised how cool it would be to have my own record store. And I thought, with my strange, weird tastes, I thought there's got to be a bunch of other weirdos out there like me that aren't interested in the mainstream or what radio is peddling this week. Or and there was no, podcasts weren't a thing, and it was just like I just thought there's got to be. There's got to be an audience out there for people that are interested in the stuff I'm into.
But this was also a time, I guess, when, most people would have thought that records, LPs, record shops are just this dying breed on their way to extinction. Like, technology seemed to be heading in the opposite direction. Did you always have faith that there'd be people like you who wanted an LP?
I've had faith ever since there was the CD revolution. I never got sucked into the CD revolution in the late 80s. The record stores have always been there. I think they will always be around, especially in Melbourne. I mean, my understanding is there's more record stores in Melbourne per capita than anywhere else in the world. So what I came up with had to be something that differentiated my store from others. And
that was your weird taste, was it? Is that your mark of differentiation? So did things take off straight away?
I wouldn't say take off. I think it was, I opened early December 2015, and I was basically it was the equivalent of opening up a record store in a flat that was behind this steel garage, steel roller door. So there was no signage. It was really just a word of mouth destination in the back streets of Fitzroy. It was down this little weird shaped street. It's like you look down the street and you think you're in Prague or something like that. It's amazing. It's an amazing little street. People did enjoy coming in and being introduced to things they weren't otherwise familiar with, that they'd never heard of. And I have this passion for that. That's what's most interesting to me, is what else is out there. And I was right. I guess it's nice to know once when you are right, but I was right. There is a lot of people out there that they want to discover the other music that they're not familiar with.
When I used to go into record stores as a teenager, that was the only place you could hear that music or get that music. And of course now there's everything available all the time, often for free. How do you get someone to commit to actually purchasing an LP and taking it physically out of your store?
It's tough. I think you need to be a good salesperson to do it. I guess thankfully there's still enough people out there that they want to hold a physical product. They want to get that warmth of the record on their turntable, rather than just listening to a digitized version of that, if it's actually available on one of the streaming platforms. I mean, I'm a big advocate for artists not having their music up on streaming. I think it's I think in the long run it's going to be detrimental to the quality of music that's available. But it's really great. If I can tell you a little story that happened recently, there's a series of records called Back from the Grave. The first one came out in 1983. There's 10 of them in total. I love playing the Back from the Graves in the store, and I was playing Volume 1 recently, and there was 2 young people in the store bopping around. They're loving what they're hearing. And she comes up to the counter. She's like, "What's this you're playing? I love it." I said, "I can see that." She's like, "Oh, it's so good." And I point to my screen, which is displaying what I'm currently playing. And she goes to pull out her mobile phone from her bag. And I went, She's like, "What?" I'm like, No, don't bother. She's like, "Oh, it's not streaming?" I'm like, "It's not streaming. And it never will be." Oh. I said, there's a section right behind you, the compilation section. There's a copy of it right there behind you. I tell them the story of how the Back from the Graves come about, which is a fascinating, amazing story for the early 80s, what this man did to document 1960s US garage punk, the beginnings of garage, of punk rock, basically, what he did to document it pre-internet and how he went about it. So I tell them the story of how that came about. So she's now heard about 8 songs. She just turns around and she went and grabbed volume 1 from the racks and paid the $35 for it. And he came back in 2 weeks later and he went straight to that same section and he grabbed volume 2. And I looked at him and I said, she's enjoying it, huh? He's like, oh, she loves it so much. And it's her birthday in about 3 days' time. You will be the popular boyfriend.
What about your own family, Richie? Are you raising the next generation of obscure music lovers?
Some might be frightened to say yes, I am. I am the stepdad to 2 adorable kids, Joe and Lucinda. Joe's 11 and Lucinda's 9.5. I'm married to their mum Dee, and I'm extremely fortunate. They really make my world, and the music in our house there's always music, and we all love it. We all have an intense passion for music.
Do your friends get a bit jealous that you can play, I don't know, New York Dolls or whatever to your kids and they bop along and the friends have got to listen to whatever's top of the charts?
I think my friends and customers are astounded at and a little jealous that, like, I can tell. Just often I'm just saying, oh, the latest one for Joe and Lucinda's, they love Jay Retard. They're like, what? They love Jay Retard. I'm like, they love Jay Retard. Oh my God, my kids just listen to Miley Cyrus. It's really, really amazing. I discover things in my collection or in the, like, I have a lot of CDs. We listen to CDs in the car, and I just come across things and I just go, oh my God, the kids will love this. And they sing, oh, it's awesome.
Richie, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being my guest.
And to you, Sarah, thank you so much.
This is Conversations with Sarah Kanowski on ABC Radio.
Richie Ramone, owner of Strange World Records, was my guest on Conversations today. A big thanks, as always, to the Conversations team, executive producer Carmel Rooney and producers Nicola Harrison, Meggie Morris and Alice Moldovan, as well as our super team of audio ops. Conversations is created on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the lands of the Turrbal people. I'm Sarah Kanowski. Thanks for listening.
Hit subscribe for more or try out the ABC Listen app for thousands of other podcasts, all ad-free.